It was supposed to be a routine Tuesday afternoon flight. Then both engines died at 28,000 feet. 267 passengers. No power. 12 minutes until impact. The pilots were following every emergency protocol they knew, and watching them all fail. That's when she stood up from seat 7F. A quiet woman nobody had noticed. She walked into the cockpit and began giving orders that shouldn't have worked, but did. Minutes later, F-22 fighter jets appeared alongside. When they heard her call sign over the radio, the most elite pilots in the world stopped breathing. Then they saluted. What kind of person makes warriors salute from their cockpits? And why was she hiding on a commercial flight? Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The Boeing 777 cruised smoothly at 28,000 feet, carrying 267 souls through the crystalline afternoon sky. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles with practiced smiles, offering drinks and snacks to passengers who read books, watched movies, or slept beneath thin airline blankets. Everything appeared routine, unremarkable, safe, the kind of flight that passengers would forget before their luggage appeared on the baggage carousel. In seat 7F, a woman sat with her eyes closed, earbuds in, appearing to doze like dozens of other travelers around her. She wore comfortable jeans, a simple gray sweater, and running shoes, the universal uniform of anonymous air travel. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry except a plain watch. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything beyond ordinary. The flight attendant who'd served her ginger ale an hour earlier wouldn't have been able to describe her face 5 minutes later. The businessman in 7E had made brief small talk during boarding about weather delays, then forgotten her completely. She'd perfected this invisibility over thousands of flights, moving through airports and aircraft like a ghost, deliberately unremarkable, intentionally forgettable. Her real name would have triggered immediate recognition among military personnel worldwide. Her call sign, Falcon, was legendary in fighter pilot communities across every branch of service. She'd flown missions that remained classified decades after completion, executed tactical maneuvers that were now studied in advanced combat courses, and innovated aerial warfare techniques that shaped modern doctrine. Her achievements had earned her respect that bordered on reverence among aviators who understood what her record actually meant. But here, 30,000 feet above the ground in a civilian aircraft, she was nobody. Just another passenger, exactly as she preferred. The first indication of trouble was subtle, a slight vibration that most passengers didn't consciously register. She felt it immediately, her body attuned to aircraft behavior after decades of flying. Her eyes opened. She didn't move otherwise, just listened and felt, processing information that her training automatically catalogued. The vibration had a specific frequency, a rhythm that suggested something mechanical rather than atmospheric. She'd felt similar vibrations before, in aircraft pushed beyond normal operational limits, in systems beginning to fail under stress they weren't designed to handle. The vibration smoothed out after several seconds. Probably nothing serious yet. She closed her eyes again, but her awareness remained heightened, her subconscious mind monitoring every sound and movement of the aircraft. She'd been flying for 37 years, first in training aircraft that barely stayed airborne, then in advanced fighters that could outmaneuver physics itself, then in experimental platforms that pushed the boundaries of what human beings could survive at supersonic speeds. She'd logged more flight hours than most commercial pilots accumulated in entire careers. She'd experienced every kind of emergency, every variety of malfunction, every category of crisis that could occur at altitude. Her body had learned to read aircraft the way musicians read sheet music, instinctively, automatically, processing dozens of sensory inputs simultaneously to understand a complete picture of what was happening. 3 minutes later, the aircraft shuddered, a definite wobble that caused several passengers to glance up from their screens with mild concern. This wasn't turbulence. The movement was too regular, too mechanical. Something structural or systemic. Her eyes opened fully now, and she sat forward slightly, every sense focused. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime. The captain's voice came over the intercom, professionally calm. Folks, we're experiencing some minor turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please be seated. She heard something beneath the professional calm. A tightness. A control, the voice of someone managing a situation that was more than routine. Her eyes opened again. She watched the flight attendants moving quickly toward their jump seats, their faces composed but their movements just slightly too rapid, too purposeful. They knew something. The aircraft dropped suddenly, not the gentle dip of normal turbulence but a sickening plunge that lifted passengers against their seatbelts and sent loose items floating upward. Screams erupted throughout the cabin. The drop lasted 3 seconds that felt like 30, then the aircraft caught itself, stabilized, continued forward. The woman in 7F watched the wings through her window, noting the angle, the control surface positions, the way the aircraft was moving. This wasn't turbulence. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Harrison fought with controls that were responding in ways that violated every principle of his 23-year career. The control yoke felt wrong in his hands, mushy, delayed, as though there were layers of mechanical failure between his inputs and the aircraft's actual response. His first officer, Sarah Chen, was cycling through emergency checklists with growing desperation, her voice tight as she called out procedures that weren't working, protocols that assumed single-point failures rather than the cascading nightmare they were actually experiencing. 3 separate warning systems were screaming simultaneously, hydraulics failing in patterns that shouldn't be possible, electrical systems fluctuating between normal and critical in ways that suggested fundamental computer errors, and something catastrophically wrong with the fly-by-wire computer systems that translated pilot inputs into actual aircraft control. Harrison had trained for emergencies throughout his career. He'd practiced engine failures in simulators, dealt with hydraulic problems, managed electrical issues. But he'd never encountered anything like this. A cascade where each failure seemed to trigger others, where systems that should have been completely independent were somehow affecting each other, where the aircraft itself seemed to be fighting against every attempt to maintain controlled flight. It was a nightmare scenario that exceeded the boundaries of normal emergency training, the kind of situation that commercial aviation protocols simply didn't address because it wasn't supposed to be possible with modern aircraft design and redundant safety systems. Hydraulic pressure dropping in all 3 systems, Chen reported, her fingers flying across touchscreens that were themselves flickering unreliably. Primary flight computer showing multiple errors. I'm getting conflicting readings on, Captain, we just lost the left engine. Harrison saw it on his instruments simultaneously, the left engine's readings dropping to 0, the asymmetric thrust immediately trying to yaw the aircraft. He compensated automatically, but the controls felt wrong, mushy, delayed. Declare emergency. Get me vectors to the nearest suitable airport. Mayday, 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 Chen transmitted. United 2847, experiencing multiple system failures and engine loss, requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable. The right engine's warning lights blazed red. Both engines now gone. The aircraft was a glider, a very heavy, very complicated glider with 267 people aboard, losing altitude at a rate that gave them maybe 15 minutes before they'd be forced to attempt a landing wherever they happened to be. In the cabin, passengers understood now that something catastrophic was happening. The engine noise had changed fundamentally. Anyone who'd flown more than a few times could hear the difference between normal operation and whatever was occurring now. The aircraft's attitude felt profoundly wrong, the nose pitched at an angle that suggested descent rather than level flight, the feeling of controlled forward motion replaced by the sickening sensation of falling with style rather than actually flying. Whispers spread through the rows like wildfire, passengers turning to each other with wide eyes, asking if others felt it too, if others heard what they were hearing, if this was normal or if something terrible was actually happening. Children began crying, picking up on the tension radiating from adults who were trying desperately to maintain calm while their bodies screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. Adults gripped armrests with white-knuckled intensity, some closing their eyes in prayer, others staring fixedly at the seatback screens as though pretending everything was normal could somehow make it true. Flight attendants spoke urgently into their emergency phones, receiving instructions from the cockpit that their training had never prepared them to handle, their professional masks of calm reassurance slipping enough to show the genuine fear underneath, the realization that they might actually be living through the scenario every flight crew member dreaded but never truly believed would happen to them. A middle-aged man in row 12 began hyperventilating, his wife trying frantically to calm him while fighting her own rising panic. A teenage girl clutched her phone, typing what might be final messages to people she loved. An elderly couple held hands across the aisle, 60 years of marriage reflected in their ability to find comfort in each other even as they faced the possibility that they might die together 30,000 feet above the ground. This was real terror, not the abstract fear of turbulence or the mild anxiety of takeoff, but the bone-deep understanding that death was a genuine possibility, that the hundreds of flights these passengers had taken safely meant nothing when confronted with the reality of catastrophic system failure. The woman in 7F unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. The businessman in 7E grabbed her arm reflexively. "Ma'am, you need to stay seated. We're in an emergency." She looked at him with eyes that were absolutely calm, absolutely focused. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I'm going to the cockpit." She pulled free gently and moved forward. A flight attendant blocked the aisle, her young face pale but determined. "Ma'am, please return to your seat immediately. We're in an emergency situation, Anne." "I know exactly what kind of emergency you're in," the woman said, her voice low and commanding without being loud. "Both engines are gone. You're losing hydraulics. Your pilots are dealing with multiple cascading failures. I need to speak to the captain right now." The flight attendant blinked. Who are you?" "Someone who can help. Let me through." Something in her tone, in her bearing, made the flight attendant step aside. The woman moved to the cockpit door and knocked, 3 sharp raps that somehow conveyed authority. The door cracked open an inch. A flight attendant peered out, her face showing the strain of barely controlled panic. "You need to tell the captain I'm a military aviator with tactical emergency experience. Tell him I can help with what's happening. Tell him now." The door closed. 10 seconds passed, an eternity while passengers screamed and the aircraft continued its controlled descent toward nothing but open terrain. Then the door opened. Captain Harrison's face appeared, streaked with sweat, his eyes desperate. "Are you serious? Dead serious? How much altitude do you have?" 22,000 feet, losing 500 feet per minute. All hydraulics failing. Both engines dead. Fly-by-wire computers giving me partial control at best. I've got nothing. She stepped into the cockpit, her eyes scanning the instrument panels, processing information with a speed that made both pilots stare. Her gaze moved systematically across every display, every gauge, every warning light, not the panicked scanning of someone overwhelmed, but the methodical assessment of someone who'd been trained to process complex tactical situations in microseconds. She absorbed the complete picture of their emergency in less than 5 seconds, both engines dead, hydraulic pressure failing across all 3 independent systems, fly-by-wire computers giving intermittent responses, altitude decreasing at a rate that gave them perhaps 12 minutes before forced impact with terrain. Harrison watched her eyes move across his cockpit and realized he was witnessing something extraordinary, the kind of situational awareness that couldn't be taught, only developed through decades of flying in circumstances where incomplete information and split-second decisions meant the difference between survival and death. She wasn't guessing or hoping. She was calculating, analyzing, determining exactly what resources they had available and exactly how those resources could be leveraged to achieve what seemed impossible. "You've got more than nothing," she said, her voice carrying absolute certainty that somehow made Harrison believe her despite every instinct screaming that they were doomed. "You've got ram air turbine for emergency power. You've got manual reversion capability on some flight controls. You've got altitude and you've got airspeed. What you don't have is time, so we need to stop thinking about this as a normal emergency and start thinking about it as a tactical problem that requires unconventional solutions. Are there any suitable airports within glide range?" Chen pulled up the navigation display. Regional airport 40 miles northeast. Runway's only 6,500 feet, but it's our best option. It'll work. Captain, I need you to trust me. I'm going to walk you through procedures that aren't in any commercial aviation manual. They're tactical emergency techniques developed for military aircraft with total hydraulic failure. They'll work on this airframe if we execute them precisely. Harrison stared at her. His career, his training, every regulation he'd ever followed said he should refuse help from an unauthorized passenger, should maintain command authority, should follow established protocols even if those protocols were failing. But his instruments said he had 12 minutes before forced landing wherever they happened to be, probably in terrain that would kill everyone aboard instantly. His training said this situation was unrecoverable. His experience said they were already dead, just waiting for physics to confirm it. And this woman's eyes showed absolute confidence and zero doubt, not the false confidence of someone in denial, but the genuine certainty of someone who'd faced situations like this before and survived, who knew exactly what needed to happen and exactly how to make it happen. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, the question emerging as half challenge, half desperate plea for hope. "Someone who's landed aircraft with worse damage than this. Now listen carefully. You're going to adjust your glide angle by using differential throttle on. Wait, you said both engines are dead. Complete flameout. Complete. We tried relight procedures. Nothing." She processed this instantly. "Fine. No thrust management available. We're doing this pure aerodynamic. You're going to control your descent rate by trading airspeed for altitude using pitch attitude changes combined with emergency flap deployment at specific intervals. First officer, I need you to manually calculate our glide ratio accounting for current weight and atmospheric conditions. Captain, show me your hydraulic system schematic." For the next 8 minutes, she transformed the cockpit from a place of desperate crisis management into a coordinated tactical operation. Her voice remained absolutely calm, methodical, precise, the voice of someone who'd coordinated combat operations where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, where panic was a luxury that got people killed, where clarity of thought under maximum stress was the only thing that mattered. She guided Harrison through pitch angles that seemed too aggressive but which precisely controlled their descent rate, explaining the aerodynamic principles behind each adjustment, helping him understand why his instincts were wrong and why the numbers were right. She had Chen manually calculating deployment angles for flaps and landing gear that would give them maximum aerodynamic efficiency while maintaining sufficient control authority, walking her through mathematical formulas that commercial aviation didn't teach but which military test pilots used when pushing aircraft beyond normal operational envelopes. She identified backup systems that the pilots hadn't known existed, redundancies built into the aircraft's design that required military-level knowledge to access and activate, systems that Boeing engineers had installed for extreme emergencies but which weren't documented in commercial pilot training because they required understanding of aircraft architecture that went far beyond normal operational knowledge. She showed them how to manually route hydraulic pressure through secondary channels, how to use pneumatic systems to supplement failing electrical controls, how to balance the aircraft using subtle weight distribution adjustments that most pilots never learned because they required understanding aircraft as dynamic systems rather than just vehicles to be steered. "You're going to come in hot and steep," she told Harrison as the airport appeared on the horizon. "Steeper than any approach you've ever flown. You're going to think you're about to stall. Trust the numbers. Trust the angle. When I tell you to deploy full flaps, you deploy immediately, no hesitation. The timing window is 3 seconds. Miss it and we won't make the runway. Where did you learn this?" Chen whispered, awed despite the terror. "Somewhere you don't have clearance to know about. Captain, inform ATC we're coming in emergency. Tell them to clear the airspace and have every emergency vehicle they have ready." Harrison keyed his radio. "Tower, United 2847, inbound emergency. Dual engine failure, limited flight control, 3 souls aboard." He stopped, looked at the woman. "I don't even know your name. Tell them Falcon is coordinating the emergency procedures. Harrison blinked but transmitted, United 2847, emergency procedures coordinated by Falcon, requesting. The tower controller's voice came back immediately, but now with a different undertone. United 2847, say again your last. Did you say Falcon? Affirmative. Falcon is. United 2847, be advised military assets are being notified of your emergency. F-22 Raptors from Regional Air Defense are vectoring to your position for tactical support. Stand by. Two F-22 Raptor stealth fighters materialized seemingly from nowhere, their angular forms sliding into position on either side of the struggling 777 with the precision that only the world's most advanced aircraft and most skilled pilots could achieve. Inside their cockpits, Major Ryan Torres and Captain Jessica Wu had been on routine patrol when the emergency call came through, monitoring airspace with the casual competence of pilots who flew the most sophisticated fighters ever built. They'd expected standard escort procedures, using their advanced sensors to monitor the civilian aircraft's approach, providing real-time information to tower, standing by in case the worst happened and they needed to document the crash site for investigation. Then they'd heard the name Falcon spoken over military frequencies, and everything changed. Torres had actually stopped breathing for a moment, his hands frozen on the controls, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. Through his helmet radio, he heard Wu's sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone equally shocked, equally awed by what they were both experiencing. They both knew that call sign. Every fighter pilot in the world knew that call sign. You didn't make it through flight training, didn't earn your wings, didn't qualify for advanced fighters without hearing about Falcon. The call sign appeared in classified briefing documents, was referenced in tactical training manuals with entire sections redacted, showed up in after-action reports from conflicts that most people didn't know had occurred. Falcon wasn't just famous, Falcon was legendary in the way that myths are legendary, except everyone in military aviation knew the myth was absolutely real. The kind of legend that instructors referenced in hushed tones when teaching advanced combat maneuvers, whose missions were still classified decades after completion but whose achievements leaked through military communities like mythology passed down through generations. Torres had seen Falcon's name in classified briefing documents when he was learning advanced tactical combat at fighter weapons school, had studied mission parameters that seemed impossible until you understood that Falcon had actually executed them successfully. Wu had watched gun camera footage from one of Falcon's missions during her training at Top Gun, footage that had been shown with most tactical details redacted, but which still revealed maneuvers that seemed to defy physics, positioning that shouldn't have been possible, kills that required predictive capability bordering on precognition or perhaps just understanding of aerial combat so profound that it appeared supernatural to pilots still learning the fundamentals. Falcon was the pilot whose innovations had reshaped air combat doctrine for the 21st century. Falcon was the aviator whose tactical decisions had prevented international conflicts from escalating into full-scale wars. Falcon was the person whose identity remained classified at the highest levels, whose face most military pilots had never seen, whose real name was known only to those with top-secret clearance and need-to-know authorization. And Falcon was apparently aboard a crippled civilian aircraft, coordinating emergency procedures from the cockpit. United 2847, this is Raptor Lead, Torres transmitted, his voice carefully professional despite the shock still resonating through him like aftershocks from an earthquake. He was talking to Falcon. Actually coordinating in real time with Falcon. The legend every fighter pilot knew about but almost none had ever met. The aviator whose tactical innovations were studied in classified courses at every major military aviation school. The person whose identity remained so classified that most military personnel didn't even know Falcon's gender, let alone name or face. We have you visual. We're monitoring your approach. How can we assist? The voice that came back was calm, precise, unmistakably confident in the way that only someone with absolute mastery of their domain could project. Raptor Lead, this is Falcon. I need real-time wind shear data at runway level. I need confirmation that runway is clear for 5 miles on final approach. And I need you to verify my calculated glide path, current position, target runway, accounting for our damaged control authority and degraded aerodynamic performance. Torres's hands moved automatically, his F-22's advanced sensors scanning and calculating, providing information that the crippled 777's damaged systems couldn't reliably determine. But his mind was reeling, struggling to process the surreal reality of his situation. He was talking to Falcon. He was providing tactical support to Falcon. The person whose mission footage he'd studied during advanced training, whose tactical decisions he'd analyzed in strategy courses, whose innovations had literally changed how modern air combat was conducted, that person was aboard a dying civilian aircraft, coordinating an impossible emergency landing, and asking for his assistance. Falcon, wind shear minimal, less than 5 knots variation at runway level. Runway is clear and emergency vehicles positioned. Your glide path calculations are accurate within our sensor margin. You're going to make it, but your margin is. He calculated quickly, his computer running numbers that made his stomach tighten. 80 seconds and less than 1,000 feet altitude at runway threshold. That's cutting it closer than anything I've ever seen outside combat scenarios. Copy that, Raptor lead. That's sufficient. Maintain formation through landing. I may need real-time sensor data during final approach. Roger, Falcon. Happy to assist. Torres paused, then added something he'd never said to any civilian aircraft in his career: "It's an honor to fly with you, ma'am." In Wu's cockpit, she rendered a formal military salute, hand to helmet, precise and crisp, holding the position with the rigid discipline that military protocol demanded. Torres couldn't see her through the canopy separation, but he knew she'd done it. He could feel it. Because he was doing exactly the same thing, raising his gloved hand to his helmet in a salute that acknowledged not just rank or position, but genuine excellence, the kind of achievement that transcended normal recognition. They were saluting someone aboard a civilian aircraft, someone who technically held no command authority over them, someone who wasn't even in their chain of command. It violated about 20 protocols and regulations. But they were saluting Falcon, and that transcended protocol, transcended regulations, transcended everything except the fundamental respect that warriors give to those who've achieved what others can only aspire toward. In military aviation, salutes were rendered for rank, for authority, for formal occasions. But there was another kind of salute, informal, spontaneous, given not because regulations required it but because respect demanded it. The salute that pilots gave when they witnessed something extraordinary, when they encountered excellence so profound that acknowledgement became necessary. Torres had rendered such salutes perhaps 3 times in his entire career, once for his first squadron commander who'd saved his life during a training accident, once when watching a demonstration pilot execute maneuvers that seemed to violate physics, and now, for Falcon, the legend he'd never expected to encounter, whose presence transformed a routine escort mission into something he'd remember for the rest of his life. Inside the 777's cockpit, Harrison heard the exchange and glanced at the woman who'd taken practical command of his aircraft. She was focused entirely on instruments and the approaching runway, her face showing the absolute concentration of someone whose entire being was devoted to solving an impossibly complex problem where failure meant 267 deaths. Every muscle in her body was engaged but relaxed, tension without rigidity, the physical state of someone operating at peak performance under maximum stress. Her hands moved across the instrument panel with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, making subtle adjustments to trim settings and system configurations that Harrison barely understood but which were clearly making the difference between controlled flight and uncontrolled descent. He'd flown with many co-pilots over his 23-year career, trained with numerous instructors at various stages of his advancement, coordinated with countless air traffic controllers during complex approaches in challenging conditions. He'd worked alongside people he respected, people he admired, people whose skill he'd tried to emulate. But he'd never seen anyone operate with this level of calm capability under pressure that would shatter most people, pressure that was shattering him, if he was honest with himself, pressure that had reduced First Officer Chen to barely controlled panic before this woman had entered the cockpit and somehow made the impossible seem merely difficult. "Falcon," he said quietly. "That's your call sign. From military service. Focus on the approach, Captain. The F-22 pilots saluted you. I heard it in their voices. They saluted someone in a civilian cockpit. "Captain Harrison, we have 90 seconds until touchdown. I need you completely focused." He nodded, forced himself to concentrate. But his mind was spinning with the realization that he'd just spent the worst 8 minutes of his aviation career working alongside someone who made elite F-22 pilots render honors over military frequencies. She guided them through the approach with surgical precision. Airspeed 160. Pitch angle 4 degrees nose up. Deploy landing gear now. The gear ground down manually, creating massive drag. The aircraft's nose wanted to drop. Counter with pitch. Hold that angle. Hold it. First stage flaps, now. Chen deployed them. The aircraft shuddered, bucked, but maintained its glide path. The runway filled the windscreen, appearing too close, too fast, at an angle that violated every instinct Harrison had about safe approaches. "You're doing perfectly," Falcon said. "Trust the angle. Full flaps on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." Chen slammed the flap lever full. The aircraft's nose pitched violently. Harrison fought it, keeping them aligned. The runway threshold passed beneath them. They were going to make it, actually going to make it. "Flare now, gently, hold the nose up, let the main gear touch first." The main landing gear struck the runway with a teeth-rattling impact. The aircraft bounced once, settled, and Harrison immediately deployed every aerodynamic brake they had left. The aircraft rolled down the runway, bleeding speed, eating up the distance. 6,500 feet wasn't much for a 777. They had no thrust reversers, limited braking authority. But they were on the ground and slowing. 5,000 feet remaining. 4,000, 3,000, 2,000 at the end of the runway, approaching fast. 1,000 feet. 500. The aircraft stopped with 300 feet of runway remaining. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence in the cockpit was absolute, the silence of people who just stared directly into death and somehow survived, who'd pushed themselves and their aircraft beyond every conceivable limit and found themselves still alive on the other side. Harrison's hands were still gripping the control yoke with such force that his fingers had gone numb, his body locked in a position of maximum concentration, unable to immediately process that the emergency was over, that they'd actually made it. Then the silence shattered. The cockpit erupted with sounds, Harrison gasping for air as though he'd been holding his breath for the entire approach, Chen crying openly with relief and residual terror and overwhelming gratitude, emergency checklists falling from shaking hands that could no longer maintain their grip. The radio exploded with transmissions from tower controllers who'd watched the impossible landing, from emergency crews racing toward the aircraft, from other pilots who'd been monitoring the frequency and couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. Behind them, in the cabin, 267 passengers were screaming with relief, not screams of terror anymore but screams of pure emotion, the sound of people who genuinely believed they were about to die and had somehow been given their lives back. People were crying uncontrollably, hugging complete strangers with desperate intensity, calling out to family members across the aisle, laughing and sobbing simultaneously in the way that only profound emotional release allows. Parents clutched their children. Spouses held each other. Solo travelers grabbed the hands of whoever sat nearest, needing human connection, needing to share this moment with someone who understood because they'd experienced the same brush with death. The teenage girl who'd been typing final messages was staring at her phone screen, reading words she'd written believing she'd never send another text, never see another sunrise, never graduate high school or go to college or fall in love or experience any of the 1,000 futures she'd always assumed would be hers. The elderly couple was still holding hands across the aisle, but now they were laughing through tears, 60 years of marriage having just been granted an extension neither had dared hope for minutes earlier. Falcon stood calmly and moved toward the cockpit door. Harrison grabbed her arm, his grip still trembling from adrenaline, his face showing the profound emotional impact of what they'd just accomplished together. "Wait. You can't just walk away. I need to know, we all need to know. Who are you really? What's your actual name? Where did you serve? What aircraft did you fly? The questions tumbled out desperately, driven by his need to understand, to contextualize, to somehow make sense of what had just happened. She looked at him with eyes that showed depths of experience he couldn't begin to fathom, eyes that had seen combat, had made life-and-death decisions affecting thousands of people, had witnessed horrors and triumphs that would remain classified long after everyone involved was dead. "I'm someone who was in the right place at the right time, Captain. You landed the aircraft. You maintained control when everything was failing. You trusted someone you had no reason to trust. You executed procedures you'd never trained for. You saved everyone aboard." "That's bullshit and you know it," Harrison said, his voice breaking slightly. Without you, we'd have crashed into terrain 8 minutes ago. Without your knowledge, your expertise, your calm guidance." He stopped, overwhelmed. The cockpit radio crackled to life. "United 2847, this is Raptor Lead. Emergency vehicles are approaching your position. Falcon, requesting permission to maintain position until you've safely deplaned. And ma'am." Torres's voice held emotion he wasn't quite hiding. "On behalf of every military aviator monitoring this frequency, we want you to know, it was the highest honor of our careers to provide escort for your aircraft. Your expertise just saved 267 lives using tactics that most pilots couldn't execute in a simulator. That's who you are. That's what you represent." Through the cockpit windows, they could see both F-22 Raptors in formation, and inside each cockpit, the pilots rendered formal military salutes, holding them, unmistakable gestures of profound respect and recognition. Chen was staring at the F-22s with her mouth open. "They're saluting you. The most elite pilots in the world are saluting you." Passengers were crowding toward the cockpit now, emergency evacuation protocols momentarily forgotten in their desperation to see and thank whoever had saved them. A flight attendant was explaining breathlessly to anyone who would listen that a passenger, just a regular passenger from seat 7F, had somehow known exactly what to do. The businessman from 7E was insisting loudly that the woman had seemed completely ordinary, that he'd talked to her about weather, that there'd been nothing to suggest she was anything special. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft. Ground crews were positioning stairs. And through it all, Falcon stood quietly in the cockpit, watching the F-22s maintain their formation position, seeing the salutes held by pilots who understood exactly what her presence meant. "My real name is classified," she said softly, speaking to Harrison and Chen but also to the passengers crowding near the cockpit door. "My service record is classified. Most of my career is classified. But my call sign, Falcon, that's known throughout military aviation. Those pilots out there, those F-22 Raptors, they're the best aviators in the world. And they're saluting me because they know what that call sign represents. They know I've flown missions that rewrote tactical doctrine. They know I've made command decisions that changed the strategic balance of conflicts most civilians never heard about. They know I've trained generations of fighter pilots in techniques that are still classified. That's why they salute. That's what Falcon means in their world." "But you were just sitting in seat 7F, whispered a teenage girl who'd pushed forward through the crowd. "You were just reading a book. I saw you. You were nobody." Falcon smiled slightly. "I'm always nobody when I travel commercially. That's intentional. I've been flying civilian aircraft for 20 years trying very hard not to be recognized, not to draw attention, not to be special. Because I'm retired from active service, because I've earned the right to be anonymous. Because being a legend is exhausting, and sometimes I just want to travel from one city to another without anyone knowing who I am or what I've done. But today," Harrison started. "Today 267 people needed someone with my specific training and experience, and I was here. So anonymity ended. But the salute out there?" She gestured toward the F-22s. "That's not about fame or recognition in the way civilians understand it. That's professional respect from peers who comprehend exactly what my record represents. Those pilots know what it takes to earn the call sign Falcon. They know what missions I flew, what decisions I made, what innovations I created. Their salute isn't about celebrity. It's about acknowledgement from the only people qualified to judge what I've actually accomplished. The F-22 Raptors began to peel away, their formation break perfectly synchronized. Torres's voice came one last time, "Falcon, Raptor lead. We're RTB now. Know that this story will be told in ready rooms and squadron briefings for decades. Fair winds, ma'am. And thank you for reminding us what the best of our profession looks like." She keyed the cockpit radio one final time. "Thank you, Raptor lead. Clear skies and good hunting." The passengers exploded with questions. Who was she really? What missions had she flown? Why was she traveling alone on a commercial aircraft? Could they take pictures? Could they have her autograph? The flight attendants were trying to restore order, to begin proper emergency evacuation, but nobody wanted to leave until they understood who had saved them. Falcon raised her hands for quiet. The gesture was small but commanding. Instantly everyone fell silent. "My name remains classified. I can't discuss my service record. I can't take pictures or give interviews. What I can tell you is that I'm grateful I was here, grateful my training could help, and grateful that Captain Harrison and First Officer Chen trusted someone who appeared out of nowhere claiming to have answers. They deserve recognition for having the courage to accept unorthodox help during a crisis. They deserve recognition for executing procedures perfectly under pressure that would break most people. I was just the person with tactical knowledge. They were the pilots who actually landed this aircraft." Harrison shook his head firmly. "No ma'am. You saved this aircraft. Without you, we'd have crashed into open terrain killing everyone aboard. Without your procedures, your calm guidance, your tactical expertise," his voice broke. "You saved my passengers. You saved my crew. You saved me. I don't care what protocols say. I don't care about regulations. You're the reason 267 people are going home tonight." The passengers erupted in applause, deafening, sustained, emotional applause driven by the simple reality that they'd been minutes from death and now they were alive because someone extraordinary had been sitting anonymously in seat 7F. She let them applaud for 30 seconds, then raised her hands again. "Please evacuate the aircraft now. Emergency services need to inspect the damage. Your families are terrified and need to know you're safe. Go. Call them. Hug them. Live your lives. That's all I wanted to achieve today." As passengers began filing out, still looking back at her, still crying with gratitude, still trying to process what had happened, Harrison stood blocking the cockpit doorway. "I need to know. Just between us. What branch of service? What aircraft did you fly?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her wallet and pulled out a simple business card. On it was printed only a phone number and beneath it, a single line, "When legends are needed, they answer." "That phone number reaches a classified military office," she said quietly. "If you call it and mention Falcon, they'll tell you that call sign belongs to someone whose identity and service record remain classified at levels requiring presidential authorization to access. They'll tell you Falcon has more confirmed tactical victories than any aviator in modern history. They'll tell you Falcon pioneered aerial combat techniques that are still being refined and studied. They'll tell you Falcon's strategic decisions prevented wars that would have killed thousands. What they won't tell you is my real name, my current location, or anything else that would compromise my anonymity. Because I've earned the right to live quietly. Today was an exception. Tomorrow I go back to being nobody." She handed him the card and walked past him toward the exit stairs. Emergency personnel were waiting, dozens of them, having heard the radio traffic, having understood that someone exceptional had just performed a miracle aboard that aircraft. As she appeared in the doorway, several military personnel in the emergency response team snapped to attention and saluted. She returned their salutes with practiced precision, then descended the stairs and walked toward a waiting vehicle without looking back. Captain Harrison stood in the cockpit doorway watching her go, the business card in his hand, 267 lives saved by someone whose real identity would remain forever classified. First Officer Chen appeared beside him. "I'm going to tell this story for the rest of my life," she said softly. "And nobody's ever going to believe me." "They'll believe the flight recorder data," Harrison replied. "They'll believe the radio transcripts. They'll believe the testimony of 267 passengers and the F-22 pilots who saluted her from their cockpits. Falcon's real. And Falcon just proved that legends exist for a reason, because sometimes ordinary capability isn't enough. Sometimes you need someone extraordinary." At the edge of the airfield, Falcon climbed into a nondescript sedan driven by someone who didn't ask questions. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to a classified number, anonymity compromised. "Resuming travel protocols tomorrow. No injuries. Mission successful." The response came instantly, "Acknowledged. Well done, Falcon. As always." She deleted both messages, leaned back in the seat, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd board another aircraft, sit in another anonymous seat, blend into another crowd of travelers who'd never recognize her. But today, for 8 minutes, she'd been who she really was, someone whose expertise exceeded civilian boundaries, someone whose call sign commanded respect from the world's elite aviators, someone whose hidden identity became essential when crisis demanded capabilities that ordinary qualification couldn't provide. The F-22 pilots would tell the story in ready rooms and squadron briefings, but they'd never know her real name. The passengers would remember her calm authority and tactical precision, but they'd never know her face after today. Captain Harrison would keep the business card in his wallet for the rest of his career, but he'd never call the number because he understood what it represented, access to a world where legends operated beyond public recognition. And Seat 7F would remain just another seat on just another aircraft, occasionally occupied by someone who appeared completely ordinary while carrying expertise that could save hundreds of lives if circumstances required. That was the burden and the gift of being Falcon, the legend who chose anonymity, the warrior who preferred invisibility, the person whose greatest skill was living unknown until the moment when being extraordinary became absolutely necessary. The sedan drove away from the airfield, carrying a legend back toward obscurity, leaving behind 267 people alive because someone exceptional had been present when excellence became survival's only option. And in the sky above, where F-22 Raptors had moments before rendered their salutes, the clouds drifted peacefully through an afternoon that had nearly become tragedy but had instead become proof that sometimes heroes hide in plain sight, waiting quietly until their unique capabilities become the only thing standing between disaster and deliverance.